Prayer is one of the most challenging issues in religious philosophy. Hello, I'm Chris Meyer. Welcome to session 15 of Are We Being Deceived? Searching for Truth in Religion. Obviously, there's nothing in nature to give us a clue concerning prayer. However, if we examine the concept of prayer, we can draw some conclusions that are rational and logical. There are many reasons why people pray. Sometimes people pray because they need help. Sometimes it's to offer praise, and at other times it might be to ask God to help someone else who is in need. Others pray because in some religions, praying a certain number of times at specific times of day is a requirement. Whatever the reason, there are several implications that are inherent when we discuss prayer. First, when we ask God for something, we are implying that God isn't aware that we have a certain need or desire, so we have to bring it to God's attention. If God is perfect in knowledge, then God already knows what we need or desire. Remember what Jesus said concerning prayer. He said, "And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him." Secondly, prayer implies that we can be persuasive enough to convince God to give us what we need or want. In other words, we think we have the power to influence how God will work in our lives and the lives of others. That implies that we can have control over God. Thirdly, prayer infers that we know better than God what should be done or what should not be done in a specific situation. Again, the implication here is that we are more knowledgeable than God. Do we think we know better than God when it is God who understands and sees everything fully, whereas we can only see things from a very limited perspective? With our limited knowledge of what is involved in any given situation, we might actually be praying for something that would result in a worse situation if God answered that prayer and gave us what we requested. And fourth, prayer infers that God will alter everyone else's schedule or life in some way so that we can get what we want. If I pray that God will give me a specific job, for instance, will God answer that prayer and give me the job when someone else is more qualified and needs the job more than I do? Will God give me the job in spite of the fact that there is a better job for me somewhere else, just waiting for me to find it? Will God alter everyone else's life to give me what I want, in spite of the fact that it's not what's best for me or for others? Probably not. Our prayer should be that God will lead us to the best opportunity and allow us to be able to recognize it when we see it. So we can conclude that prayer is really not logical when approaching prayer in this way, because God already knows what we need or desire. God knows better than we do what decisions should be made, and since God's decisions are always perfect, we probably will not change God's mind through our argument, no matter how persuasive we might be. Maybe our prayers should be that God will help us in our decisions, give us guidance, and allow us the sensitivity to recognize and discern what is from God and what is from our own desires. Remember, as we have discussed previously, God is already actively participating in answering our prayers by giving us the tools and capabilities we need to make logical decisions. And as mentioned, God is available to assist us through a variety of resources, such as other people and a wealth of information from a myriad of sources. Certainly there are those who pray and then hope to get some supernatural sign. One of the greatest dangers regarding prayer is that the person doing the praying won't do anything but sit around and wait for an answer, a supernatural revelation of some kind, an epiphany. These seldom come. God answers prayers by helping us make right decisions, but we have to be actively involved in the decision-making process. God's sign, a revelation, comes to us as we get involved in trying to find the answers to our dilemma. As we search for answers to our prayers or become actively involved in the answer to our prayers, we're learning valuable lessons that can result in patience and wisdom. God has already given us what we need to act. This is true with all of our decisions. We have the greatest creative, intelligent energy in our lives. All we need to do is learn to tap that amazing power. But as for answering prayer supernaturally, God is God, and God will do whatever it sees fit and necessary to do. So nothing is out of the realm of possibility. So is praying for food, shelter, and clothing a waste of time? Probably not. But if God is truly omnipotent, then God already knows what we need. Perhaps it makes us feel better to have asked for it, but the incomprehensible one already knows our needs and our desires. Once again, we must remember, we must be actively involved in getting these things for ourselves. If we pray for food and then sit around waiting for a handout or for a steak to fall from the sky, we might just starve to death. We always have to be involved in the process. The secret is to offer praise to God for providing these things to us. So, is God no more than an enabler, helping us to achieve our objectives or fulfilling our needs? No, God is much more than that. God also gets involved by putting people and other influences in our lives that can help us. God provides us with a wealth of information if we look for it. And God offers us wisdom as well. So God is not just an enabler. God is also an active provider, as well as the power or energy behind our thoughts. God is always with us, assisting us in our decision making. What about praying for healing? Well, let's face the truth. If God answered the prayer of every person who prayed for healing, no one would be sick and no one would die. Additionally, when a person doesn't get better and does die, is it God's fault for not answering the prayer? Or is it life? The consequences of life must be played out if there's going to be a balance in this world. That's the way the world was designed. You see what I mean? The simple fact is that if God answered every prayer by every person according to their desires, there would be no sickness, no death, no sorrow, no pain, no responsibility for our actions because God would always step in and fix the situation. I guess we would call that heaven. Unfortunately, this is not heaven. On this earth, in this life, there is pain and sorrow and death. That's the order of this world. So does this mean that God will not step in and supernaturally alter a situation? Again, nothing is beyond God. Since the Spirit does whatever it chooses to do, supernatural involvement is not beyond reason when it comes to a supernatural being. But I'm not sure that supernatural intervention comes as a result of a prayer request. God knows and God acts. Sometimes when it's best for someone to be miraculously cured, it happens. When there's a situation that needs an immediate supernatural remedy, it comes. Some people might call that coincidence, but one man's coincidence is another man's miracle. There have been too many such occurrences in my own life to be considered coincidence. I'm not sure why or when God does it, but logically or not, God acts when and where God pleases, and it's always the correct decision. So what is our conclusion concerning prayer? As I mentioned, prayer, talking to God, is very complex. Most religions set certain criteria for prayer. You must face a certain direction, pray at a specific time of day, say certain words over and over, pray in someone's name, hold hands. All of these things imply that the Almighty One cannot or will not hear the prayer if those conditions are not met. If a loving parent will listen to their children under any circumstance, then why would a loving God set such parameters before hearing our prayers? It seems totally out of character. The danger in following these rituals, praying a certain number of times a day or before meals or at bedtime, might become so automatic that they are meaningless, except to make the person praying feel better about himself because he has met the requirement of performing that rite. Remember, prayer is communication. If God exists around us and within us, then our very thoughts are prayers. Earlier I said that prayer is not logical. However, if we realize that God is living in us, then communication is not only logical, it is natural. God knows our thoughts. Therefore, every thought is communication. If a person wants to make conversations with God more formal, that's his option. But we must be aware that God is always participating in our lives, constantly communicating through our thoughts. It seems that prayer has become more for the individual doing the praying than it is a conversation with God. Here's what I mean. Prayer offers hope. Hope makes a person more optimistic. People who are optimistic tend to look for positive answers or results. If you pray and have faith that God will answer your prayer, then you are more positive about the outcome of whatever it is being prayed about or for. If a group of people is praying for the same thing, then the optimism or hope is increased even more. So these things are good. From another aspect, though, prayer can also have dangers associated with it. And as we have already mentioned, a person might pray and then sit around doing nothing but wait for a supernatural answer. The other danger is that God will get the blame if a prayer is not answered in a positive way. As we have discussed, since we are subject to consequences, both our own and those of others, bad things happen. And when bad things happen, there is a tendency to blame God. God becomes the scapegoat. Sometimes God is the one who we blame instead of accepting the responsibility ourselves or admitting that what happened was a natural consequence of life. Until we can accept responsibility for our own actions and understand that we are subject to the consequences of the action of others, we will always be looking to blame someone or something else for our situations or misfortunes. We need to acknowledge that life brings good and bad, and we are subject to both. Blaming God can also cause us to resent God, and therefore avoid communication and cease our attempts to establish an ever closer relationship with the ultimate power that lives within us. And that can have a devastating effect on our life. Because as God's creation, we were made to be one with this awesome power. And if we neglect that relationship, we will be incomplete. If you want to get more information, a little more detail, you can get my book, Are We Being Deceived? It's available at Amazon.com in ebook and paperback, or you can order it through your local bookstore. I hope to see you for the next session.